Good morning, everyone. This morning, we're joined by Professor Andrea Headley, assistant professor in our McCourt School of Public Policy, who joined our community this past August. And Andrea, thank you for being with us and giving us this opportunity to learn more about you and your work. Thank you for being here. So let's get started. Your research focuses on public management, racial equity, and criminal justice policy. How did you come to focus on this area of research, and what do you consider the most urgent or central questions that you're seeking to address through your research?
Thank you for that welcome and for this opportunity to talk more about my research and interests. And to answer the question, I've been interested in the criminal justice system since I was in middle school, and really it stemmed in part from seeing loved ones who were impacted by the justice system, but also seeing the ways in which resources, power, and knowledge shape access to government services more broadly. And so I was in a pre-law magnet school. I went to pre-law high school. I went to undergrad thinking that I was going to go on to law school and become a public defender. But it was while I was in undergrad and I was already majoring in criminology, but then started to explore an additional major that focused on communities and program development, that it really grounded my focus in trying to really focus on the community a little bit more. And in undergrad, I got involved with research. And so I really value getting undergrads involved with research now as well. But during that process, it allowed me to see that there were numerous ways to impact issues that I cared about, right? I didn't have to just go to law school. I could do research and get a PhD. And so I decided to do that. But instead of focusing specifically on criminal justice alone, I wanted to focus on something a little broader. And so I ended up getting my PhD in public affairs with a focus on public administration and policy. And so while I knew I would still focus on criminal justice from the onset, I had no interest in focusing on policing, which a lot of my work has been around now. But it was during my PhD that Michael Brown was killed in Ferguson in 2014. And I started to realize a historical pattern and the recommendations that were being put forth to address police reform, and that there was a lack of evidence based on the effectiveness of these reforms. And so I was really interested in trying to add to that, right? So evaluating police reforms, thinking about things like body cameras, or how we can reduce use of force, or how does racial diversity on the police force make a difference, for instance. And so that really set me on the path to the intersection of public management, racial equity, and criminal justice policy. With regard to your second question, though, about the most urgent and central questions that I seek to address through my research, really, I would sum it up by saying I'm interested in trying to figure out how we can create a more effective and equitable criminal justice system. And so that, to me, means focusing on prioritizing fairness as it pertains to race and gender and economic equality, reducing harms for individuals and families and communities that could be caused by the justice system, and then focusing on prevention as opposed to solely reaction.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, I'd like to pick up on some of the work you're doing regarding policing. You were recently appointed as the visiting scholar on policing, race, and crime at the National Police Foundation, which is a new position. Can you tell us a little bit more about that role and the work you're hoping to do as a visiting scholar with the foundation?
Yeah, so this is a position that I'm really excited about. And so first, let me say a word or two about the National Police Foundation, and then I'll get into the specific position. And so the Police Foundation's mission is really to advance policing through innovation, science, and evidence. And it was started in the 1960s by a Ford Foundation grant after the period of civil unrest that was happening in the country. And so I started in this role last semester, and really the vision was and is twofold. And so first, it's me assisting in conducting research on racial disparities in policing and really conducting experiments that can test alternatives to reducing disparities in police outcomes, because we don't really have a large evidence base that gets at what we know works or does not work in terms of reducing disparities. And then second is providing expert advice and input into the Police Foundation's ongoing research planning to really assist the foundation with incorporating a racial lens into their existing research designs and research agendas. And so that's really kind of the twofold with regards to the responsibilities. But most recently, actually, the Police Foundation created a national council on policing reform and race, which is a majority Black-led, nonpartisan initiative that brought leaders from diverse sectors, including public officials, police representatives, business representatives, and this panel or council, the mission is to use research and evidence to make recommendations regarding policing reforms to give to police departments across the country. And so I've been also providing research support to that council in order to make sure the recommendations are backed by social science evidence.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Now, I know some of your current research focuses on the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on first responders. Can you tell us a little bit about this work?
Yeah, so one of my most recent projects that's still ongoing, and we're currently in the second phase of data collection, focuses on just that, right? So we're trying to understand the impacts of the pandemic on firefighters, police officers, EMT paramedics. And this is a collaborative research project where I'm leading a team of 4 other researchers at different institutions. And we currently have about 7 research assistants as well across the different institutions. But really the aims of this project, I guess, are threefold. And so first, we were interested in examining how first responders who have been at the forefront of the pandemic, well, one of the many essential workers at the forefront of the pandemic, that have been, how they have been personally and professionally impacted. And so we are looking to assess things like how it's impacted their daily work responsibilities, the psychosocial impacts on individual first responders with regard to their emotional and mental well-being, their stress levels and how they cope. But we were also interested in trying to see how the impact of colliding or cascading crises has made a difference in shifting their role responsibilities. So thinking about, for instance, the opioid epidemic that really plagues certain communities, and now we have a pandemic as well. And so how does different crises impact the first responders? And lastly, we are interested in really trying to understand the ways in which organizations, right, first response agencies can provide formal and informal support mechanisms to mitigate some of the potential negative impacts that could be happening on first responders. And so in order to carry out these goals, we've been using different methods, and we have looked at a review of secondary sources. We've conducted a systematic policy review at the state level. We're currently administering a survey to a sample of first response agencies and their employees. And we have about 3,000 people who have responded already. And we're about to start in-depth qualitative interviews and focus groups to really better unpack the ways in which they were affected. But we really hope, while there's a lot of moving parts, that this project can have real practical implications for first response agencies in the future, particularly when we're thinking about going forward and potential crises that may happen in the future.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, another dimension of your research is into the architecture of police departments and how architectural design can impact community perceptions of those departments. Can you share some of your findings from that research with us?
Yeah. So colleagues and I completed a grant-funded study to examine the perceptual impact of the built physical design of police departments. And so this project was inspired by 2 things. First, I brought this idea to my colleagues after doing qualitative field work in policing, and in a particular police department, where I remember being in this police department in the lobby, and I felt like I was detained. And I was there doing field work, right? I was there interviewing officers, and I had like official badges and things as a part of this. But there was a bullet hole in the window, there was yellow tape in certain areas of the lobby, and it just didn't feel like a place that I wanted to be in. And I knew that the colleagues that I ended up bringing this work to were already investigating the impacts of the physical design and space of correctional settings, thinking about how we can design those to create more humane facilities, for instance. And they were already doing theorizing about this. And so I thought this would be a really great opportunity to combine their knowledge of the impact of physical design, but bringing it to the policing space. And so we figured already that examining the physical design was important. And it's not to suggest that we think that it will be the fix-all or the thing that makes a difference in the grand scheme of how we think about criminal justice in this country. But we do know that in police stations, right, people are brought for booking, victims come to report crimes, they file complaints, they retrieve records. officers conduct important parts of their work. And so we also know, if we think about research outside of policing, right, in fields like urban design and psychogeography, that they have long argued that the buildings and the built environment influences human psychology and behavior, right? We also noticed that police departments had been devoting attention to improving their police buildings. And this was occurring in places like New Canaan, Connecticut, small towns, including large cities like Cincinnati or Nashville or Seattle. And police departments were using words that said, let's create a more friendly or a more welcoming or approachable building, right? So they were using these words saying that the building can actually convey certain messages to the public. And we were interested in seeing, well, how do we know that, right? Like, let's empirically investigate whether that is in fact the case. And so in the social science literature, we know very little about the impact of police buildings. So we designed the survey experiment as a first kind of exploratory analysis into this to see how two different types of building designs. So we theorized that there were certain building designs that can be considered as hostile or discouraging interaction. And then there are others that we theorize would be as more welcoming or open or inviting. And so we then ranked kind of police departments according to people's perceptions of them first, and then deployed a survey experiment to look at the ways in which the different type of police design impact perceptions. And so what we found was that, generally speaking, when people were presented with a police department image that was perceived as a bit less welcoming or more hostile, so this was one that appeared to be more isolated or cold or unsafe, that all respondents generally were less likely to agree that they felt safe or confident or optimistic or calm, right? What we consider these positive affect statements. But they were more likely to express positive affect statements when compared to the welcoming building. However, when we broke down this finding, we broke it down by demographic subgroups, so we could compare across, white individuals, Black individuals, Latino and Latina individuals, right, to see how the trends were. And we found results that were the opposite, particularly for Black and Latino. And so what we found was that particularly for Black and Latino respondents, they were more likely to agree with expressing positive emotions when they saw a building that was classified as hostile or less welcoming. And so this was contrary to what we expected, but really the conclusions that we took away from that was really honing in on the fact that architectural design becomes a significant predictor of perceptions depending on someone's self-identified racial or ethnic group, and that it's important that when we assess building new things or creating new types of buildings, that what the different racial or ethnic implications could be, and really getting different groups' perspectives ahead of time, right? And getting their input into building design, as opposed to just assuming that the certain types of features or designs are going to be consistent across all groups.
Got it. Thank you. Thank you very much. Now, you've worked with several government agencies and nonprofits, ranging from police departments to children's services to the Community Relations Service of the Department of Justice. Can you speak a little bit about what it's like as a researcher and as a scholar to work directly with organizations or departments to ensure that what we're learning through research can shape our approaches to policy and practice?
Well, I have to admit that working directly with different organizations and communities really fulfills me on both personal and professional fronts, right? And so it really helps me to keep my feet to the ground and have a better understanding of the important issues that are faced by community members and government organizations. But because I particularly have a desire to do research that informs policy, that informs practice, that has a tangible and meaningful and positive impact on communities, to do that, I have to ask questions that matter to them, right? That matter to communities, that matter to government organizations, and use research to find the answers to the challenges they're facing. And so by working with these organizations and in these organizations, it helps me to be able to identify what those important questions are. And so it aids in the process on both the front end, but also on the back end, when I'm also thinking about trying to translate that research back to practice. And so one example of that, and a more recent example, is me and one of my colleagues at the McCourt School have recently started the a new project that still gets at the heart of my research with regards to creating an effective criminal justice system. And this project is looking at how we can increase record sealing applications take-ups. And so what I mean by that is, like, what we know that people who have criminal records face lots of barriers with regards to things like access to employment and housing and education. And we know that there are states and localities have different programs that allow for record sealing or expungement depending on certain requirements. And so we're working with this one district attorney's office in particular that expanded their sealing kind of process to make it a bit more friendly or intuitive, and yet they haven't really seen the increase in applications that they were expecting once they revamped this process. And so we're working with them to propose and conduct a randomized control trial and use behavioral science to try and reduce the administrative burdens that applicants may have and nudge individuals who are potentially eligible to apply. And so while this project is still in the beginning stages, right, it's a clear example of working directly in partnership with an agency that has, you know, recently adopted new processes and yet has not received the type of impact that they are looking for, and how we can use research to hopefully aid in that process if it all, you know, goes as planned. And while there are certain challenges that come with working directly with government organizations or nonprofit organizations, such as making sure that we as academics respond in a timely manner. I think sometimes, you know, we're used to doing research on our own time, and sometimes in the world of practice, they need results quicker. I think even despite that, there's so much reward to producing knowledge and evidence that really can inform policies and practice.
Thank you. Thank you. And I can't thank you enough for taking this time. And welcome to Georgetown. It's a real privilege to be able to spend this time together. In closing, is there a message you'd like to share with our community?
Yes, there is. And so I will say that I am excited to be at the Georgetown community, and I'm excited to be in the public policy school in particular. I think, though, that obviously I'm biased, but I think criminal justice policy is one of the most important policy areas to focus on, particularly if we want to impact racial equity and social justice in this country. And it's important because it represents one of the most frequent contacts between the government and its residents. It's estimated, for instance, that approximately 1 in 4 residents have had a contact with the police in a given year. We know that over 1 in 3 adults actually have a criminal record, right? And so these numbers indicate the wide reach of the criminal justice system on the livelihoods of residents in this country. But the reach of the criminal justice system also extends into other policy areas, right? When we think about its impact on labor market participation, political and civic engagement, educational access, housing stability, eligibility for government benefits or social welfare programs, mental and physical health, and the list goes on. We also know that the effects of the criminal justice system disproportionately impact individuals and communities of color and those in poverty. And so I think it's important, it's a really important area to study. And that's why I am particularly interested in studying it. I know there's already a lot of work being done by people on the ground. And I know that there are people in the Georgetown community already doing work in this area, right? We have certain centers committed to doing work in the realm of juvenile justice. We have people in the psychology department and the law school and the government department. And so I'm excited to add to this vibrant community, but I also hope to inspire more people to join us in this effort.
We're very fortunate that you're now a part of our community, and we look forward to all the contributions that you will be making. Thank you for taking this time to join us today, and I look forward to being with all of you again soon. Take care of yourselves and take care of everyone around you. For every Hoya, everywhere.